time and schedule, how about if we get started? Okay? Please identify yourself.
Okay, good
Welcome
afternoon.
again. And
Carla
proceed.
Pagan, Executive Director of the Board of
And
Revision
hold
of
on one
Taxes.
second.
Sure.
Anyone that's having conversation, please? Can't hear? Thank you. Sorry.
Good afternoon, Council. Carla Pagan, Executive Director of the Board of Revision of Taxes.
Afternoon.
I'm here today with senior staff. So the Board of Revision of Taxes is charged with the main function of hearing appeals on real property assessment valuations and correcting iniquities in those values. The Board also renders decisions on nunc-pro-tunc petitions and unique nonprofit applications. Our FY17 proposed budget is 11% above FY16 current projections. Pennsylvania state law requires the BRT to dispose of appeals as promptly as possible. And since the implementation of AVI, 2014 AVI, doing so has been a huge undertaking and a great challenge. 2 years after AVI, I'm pleased to announce that we have less than 1% of 2014 appeals pending. We're 95% of the way through 2015 appeals, and we're halfway through the 2016 appeal hearing season. The other one item I'd like to highlight is that you all have heard that the OPA is implementing a new CAMA system, and we're pleased to be a part of that CAMA system as well. That new system will include an appeal module that we're excited to be a part of. It will streamline our workflow processes and improve communication between the departments and taxpayers. So I'd like to open the floor to questions.
All right, thank you. Why don't we just go to the question? Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
First of all, welcome. Good afternoon. And the most telling part of your testimony so far was that we survived it, because there was such a foreshadow of doom, and yes, it was painful, and for particular neighborhoods, very painful. But we seem to be stabilizing a bit. And what my question is when we did it, it was in an attempt to be revenue neutral. We put aside some dollars for appeal. And if I heard you correctly, we have not maxed out on what was to be set aside for readjustment and appeal.
That's more of a finance question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many, so I know there was a mass wave. How many in the first year after AVI, and then how many now?
Of those appeals were rendered, decisions rendered on?
Yes.
Or, appeals were due for that AVI season in October of 2013. And the board started those hearings in January of 2014. So probably around 30 to 40% were heard at the end of calendar year 2014, the remaining in calendar year 2015. So 2016 we've spent doing cleanup accounts. Some of those larger commercial properties that had very extensive hearing testimonies, they were heard this year. And then a few people, they were getting loop programs or homesteads resolved, and then they had their appeal hearing.
So of the hearings that you had, how many, I don't know how you classify your findings, how many of the appeals were granted versus found to be baseless?
Yeah, so of all the hearings that have been scheduled and decisions rendered, probably about 50% ended up being settled with the OPA, where the board made no decision on those cases. And then of the 50% that were heard by the board, it's almost split down the middle of the amount that were reduced. The market value was reduced and the market value was denied, or it remained as is.
So 75% had a amicable solution. So you said 50% that had a settlement, so somebody had to agree.
Yes.
And then of the ones left, another 50% of them, there was some reduction.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess that's all my questions, sir. Okay. Mr. Chairman? That's it.
Oh, thank you, sir.
You
Appreciate
didn't need a
it.
bell.
That's right, yeah, okay. We'll note that for record. Councilman Dom, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
In the appeals from AVI, you said less than 1% are remaining.
Yes.
But I was told back in December that all those appeals should have been resolved by the end of January. Do you know how many roughly is the number of appeals remaining?
3, actually. And
3?
3 2014 appeals probably remain. And honestly, some of those now are coming back from the courts. So, for example, if someone had their 2014 appeal heard 1 year ago, they were not satisfied, they could have gone to the Court of Common Pleas to appeal the board's decision. We're starting to hear those 2014 appeals now.
So you just have 3 left.
3.
That's pretty good.
We're darn happy about it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yes.
And the other question, in your testimony, you talk about the real estate market value appeals, and you give us the numbers. Are you allowed to give us the dollar values involved so we understand the impact?
The BRT does not typically report on that dollar value. Usually that is trickled through the OPA and to the Department of Finance.
Is that something that you can put together? Because I know you tell us that there was, X amount revised by the board. I'd like to know in dollar value
Yes.
what was revised.
Yes.
And that would just be helpful to understanding.
Sure.
The other question I have for you is, do you have the necessary tools, the BRT? Because here's what happens, because I come from the private sector. Private people hire the best lawyers in the city and the best real estate appraisers in the city, and they go into the BRT, and they have all the information and data which our people don't have access to. And have you seen that that's been a problem in holding the values and in making sure that we don't get clobbered, basically?
We do have far less resources than those in the private sector. I think the composition of our board right now, we're a 7-member appeals board. They come from a broad background, some attorneys, some appraisers, and they do residential and commercial appraisals, and then some have general real estate backgrounds. So that's been very helpful. If we did not have that diverse group, we would have suffered greatly. The one thing that we will get this coming fiscal year that we did not have in the past is we have money in our budget for a new consultant that will provide additional support with assistance valuing those higher end properties.
Yeah, I would say you need that support, especially on these commercial assessments that are pretty involved.
Yes.
The other question is, if we had more uniformity at OPA, wouldn't that make the appeal process easier for you to?
Absolutely. Sure.
And so, one of the comments that I made was that I thought that in general, land value, the IRS says the land values are typically 20% of market, but if we started as land value as a basis of 20% of the market value, and then maybe we said for properties above 5 stories, the land value is 10%, people at least have an idea of what the goal is, and you can adjust from that level, because of course properties right on the water are going to be more valuable, but properties not are going to be less, but that's a good basis where you could start from. If we put in place a set of those types of rules of uniformity, wouldn't that make this appeal process a lot more streamlined, easier, and a lot less appeals filing?
Sure. I mean, although most of the appeals come in for overvaluation, there is a substantial number of appeals that are filed strictly on non-uniformity.
One other question. How many appeals that are filed are commercial versus residential?
About 70% of them are residential, 30% commercial.
And do you have any idea of the dollar value of the total appeals filed and the breakdown for commercial versus residential?
I do, but I don't have that number on me.
Can you get that to the chair?
Yes, sure can.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Excuse me. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman McGinn.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
I wanted to ask a little bit, if you could talk a little bit about the delays around, the significant amount of delay around the AVI appeals. I know you made reference to some of them, about how you only got started in January of 2014, but it took through the conclusion of 2015. The consequence to the School District of Philadelphia as a result of the delay in the appeals was significant, in the millions of dollars at a time when state money wasn't being delivered. Massive budget cuts were happening to schools as a result. And there was a number of different concerns that were raised to the BRT about what could be perceived as a sluggish process, not a lot of clarity about the amount of time that was spent, what the hours were for BRT commissioners. Could you speak to that?
Sure, absolutely. And what you've described, I heard a lot of over this past year or two. So
Did you think that was unfair?
Sure. So January of the tax year in question is the normal timeline that we start hearing appeals. So for example, right now we're receiving appeals for tax year 2017. They're due October 3rd, and we'll start those appeal hearings in January. So that's the normal timeline. That timeline allows people to get their FLR decisions in, ideally their decision rendered, and if they're unsatisfied with that decision, then to appeal with the BRT. So January is a normal time to start. The second part of that from my opinion, we seem to fall on deaf ears. 24,000 are a lot of appeals. And before the board approached the AVI, the reassessment year, we looked at other municipalities as large as Philadelphia and looked at how they went through that large number of appeals in a shorter period of time. And what we found were that most of those appeal processes, number one, you don't go before a full 7-member board. And then two, they also allow the property owner far less testimony. So in most townships, you get 15 minutes to come in, make your case, and get out, which works fine maybe if you're a homeowner and your property value is $50,000 or even $200,000. But when you're getting into those cases with substantial market value, you do need more time to hear those cases.
And what percentage of the 24,000 live appeals were homeowners versus commercials?
70%.
70% homeowners?
70% were residential accounts, yes.
And did you require that all 7 members of a board be present in order to hear these appeals?
For AVI, first time ever, we did not require all 7. So you need 4 board members to make a quorum. And as a matter of fact, for several months during the AVI hearing process, we split the board. So we had hearing sessions 9:30 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 1 or 1:30 p.m., and then split the board so we can hear several hundred cases in a day versus 50 in one day.
Was that something you grew into, or was that something you started right away in January of 2014?
We didn't,
knowing how many appeals were
we didn't
pending?
start it immediately. If I can recall, that was probably in the spring that we
You were
started
starting in the spring? Because we were hearing in 2015 that the board was still meeting as a large body. Is that not accurate?
That's right. So let's see. So maybe in summer of 2015. Boy, it's hard for me to remember now. But
So spring of 2014 is 14 months from summer of 2015. Would it be 2014 or 2015?
What I can tell you, matter of factly, is that we had several months where we had 3 sessions in one day and 2 non-oral sessions during the week. And we also had a period where we had 2 hearing sessions in one day and then non-oral appeals maybe 3 days a week. So that varied through the hearing season. And that hearing season for AVI was January of 2014 all the way through December of 2015.
Were there periods when the BRT took significant breaks in hearing any appeals, more than a week or 5 days that would go without hearing cases?
In August of 2015, there was more than 1 week where we did not have oral appeal hearings. All we had were non-orals. Yeah, that's usually August.
So, I don't think it helps to rehash the past. I think that it was well established by a number of members, including myself, when I was outside of City Council, who raised direct concerns with the BRT about the sluggish pace of the appeals. As somebody who is currently on City Council, I tremendously value the property tax. I think it is the bread and butter of school financing. It's the only amount of money that basically school district kids don't have to beg, crawl, and plead for. Every other bit of money that comes into the school district of Philadelphia, we bleed through our kids for that money. We sacrifice a ton for it if we go outside the process. But what if the BRT appeals process is slow, if we're not adopting what our standard practices in other cities, which includes, breaking it up, being able to hear appeals, also allowing this, we should talk a little bit more about some of the commercial appeals and allowing for the school district to present attorneys or request subpoena requests of those property owners. We run the risk of severely impacting not just city funding, but also school district funding at a time when we can't really afford to not only even just deal with it, but significantly delay money. I mean, cash flow with the school district of Philadelphia is an important issue. What assurances can you make going forward that should we engage in all these appeals, that the BRT has a process in which appeals are heard and resolved in an extremely timely manner? I'd be interested in hearing what you think your timeline could and should be for these appeals processes, and respond to that.
So usually we set our hearing calendar based on the anticipated number of appeals. So it varies per year. Some years we have 3,000 to 5,000 appeals. AVI set a record number of appeals. I don't think City of Philadelphia has seen that quantity in appeal filings in more than 20 years, if even so. But I think, there are allowances in place and we have processes in place to adjust our scheduling accordingly.
Are you changing your scheduling practices to accommodate for the likely increase in the number of appeals? I mean, I felt like City Council went out of its way to ensure that all commissioners on the BRT had salary parity, and including bumping people up to a full significant salary
When you
increase
say
to ensure
change,
that,
okay,
but I'd like to know, has any practices substantively changed for you to ensure that there's a more timely delivery? For example, can you guarantee that appeals will be filed and resolved within a certain 30, 45, 60-day process timeline, as opposed to neighbors and residents and constituents of mine who complained about going months without hearing or waiting for an appeal?
So that guarantee, 30, 60, 90 days, no, we cannot make that guarantee.
Well, is there a timeline that you think is reasonable?
So there's some appeal cases, just like City Council testimonies, where an appeal hearing could take 2 minutes. And of those type of appeals, you can hear hundreds of those in one day. There's other type of appeal cases where hearing testimony may take 1 hour. It's very complicated testimony. So maybe of those you hear 5 a day. So to say that we can schedule and hear the appeals within 30, 60, or 90 days, it's not likely. But we do schedule those appeals based on the number that are received and based on the anticipated length of time to hear those cases.
I guess I'm just wondering how it is that a resident who files an appeal on their property tax could wait 30 days or 17 months to get an appeal heard before the BRT. Is there any kind of a timeline that you can guarantee that your appeal will be heard within or reviewed within a particular timeline and then resolved within another?
Well, so I'll tell you, our appeal filing deadline is always the first Monday of October. And then we start hearings from those appeals in January of the following calendar year. So everyone that files on time is going to wait at least 90 days for an appeal decision, no matter what. That's between October and then January. So, for example, right now we're in the 2016 appeal hearing season. So some of those people that filed in October had decisions in January, some had them in March. Some of those people that are at the tail end of that hearing calendar will get hearing dates and decisions in September of this year.
Right. So I understand that you've established a outside minimum before they hear from you. I'm asking you if you can establish an outside maximum amount of time before a situation's resolved. You will not hear from us any less than 3 months. I understand that. But the question really isn't whether people hear from you or what the minimum amount of time they have to wait to hear from you. It's the maximum amount of time that they have to wait to get a case resolved with you once the hearing is set. And I think that that would be a fair request for a lot of residents. It's necessary for city and school district to establish funding and funding projections. The School District of Philadelphia, for example, fell below its funding projections specifically because the BRT wasn't able to finish its appeals on time. And that's the situation that we're trying to avoid and try to keep on track for.
So in an ideal world, in an ideal hearing year, no property owner, whether residential or commercial office building, should wait more than 1 year to have their appeal heard.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman.
Being no further questions, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And this committee will stand in recess until 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks.